Welcome to MidLIFE Matters, where we celebrate women's wisdom and wit. I'm Georgian Lussier, your host, and I am delighted to introduce today's guest, Ellen Feldman Ornato, who has a varied business background and a fascinating partnership where they help people get really good at communicating with others in a unique and fun way. And I'm sure we're going to enjoy hearing everything that Ellen has to share this evening. So thank you, Ellen.
Thank you,
for being
Georgian.
on our show.
Oh, you're welcome.
Tell us about how you help people be brilliant in the world.
That's a great place to start. My business partner, Jenny Drescher, and I started a company called Connect and Improv like improvisation. In 2014, we started with the premise that if we could combine our experience with teaching people business skills with our love of improvisational theater, that it would create a really dynamic way for people to learn. We like to say that improv is an accelerant for learning. We were taking improv for fun and for performance benefit and started applying and building courses based on our own experiences out in the world trying to network to build our separate businesses. I had a facilitation business and facilitation and training and diversity and cultural competence and personality type and those kinds of things. And Jenny is a coach and was certified as a coach and was working in that venue. And we kept saying, how can we work together? What can we do together? Then we started taking improv, and then we discovered the world of applied improvisation, which is just exactly what I described, applying improvisation to different things. So some people use it for music, some people use it for teaching autistic youth. I mean, there are a variety of applications. Some people use it with the elderly in nursing homes and things because it really causes people to get much sharper. But we said, where are the places that people are falling down when we go to networking events? And there were two things that really stood out. One was when they went to introduce themselves, what they said was either like they were coming from Babylon, so they were just babbling on and on and on.
Oh, that's
and there was
cute.
no coherence to what they were saying. Or they were vomiting out the 30-second pitch that they'd been told that they needed. And it sounded very prescribed, and it meant nothing. And they had these catchphrases for themselves like, I'm the queen of diamonds. And you're like, what are you talking about? They lacked the genuineness of human beings. They, either because of nerves, lack of preparation, or nobody had ever taught them. So that was one thing, is what they were saying was questionable. The other thing was their delivery was miserable. And this is not a criticism of the folks out there. It's just, once again, if nobody's taught you how to stand up and be present and project your voice and smile at people, you get up and you do this, and my name is, and they sound like they're just desperate to sit down. We started with public speaking and effective networking, and the business has grown from there, and we have public workshops, and we have private clients now, and we work for corporations. It's really grown very quickly and steadily over the last couple of years.
How do you get people to embrace the idea of performance in a way, which I would think is not everyone's cup of tea, they think?
Yes. So the first question we ask when we are introducing the concept of business improv is, how many of you think you have to get up here and do a skit like they do on Whose Line Is It Anyway? And people kind of go like, forget that. That's not what this is. So what we do is we repurpose the exercises that you use to learn improv to teach business principles. So they're not actually doing performance improv when they come to our class. What they do realize quickly is that it's a safe space, that it's light and fun and playful, that they're learning from each other. We set up agreements at the top of every workshop that say things like, have fun and be playful and make your partners look great, and there's no way you can make a mistake here. And if somebody does make a mistake, we're just going to applaud and take a failure bow and keep going. Right? We look to infuse a belief in them, or to help them believe that they can fail and move forward, to detune their aversion to making a mistake. So many people don't start because they're afraid of failing. If in our classes they get over their fear of failure because they realize that it's just a blip on the screen and they can keep moving, they've gone on to do some really great things. We have some tremendous success stories that make our hearts pound a lot of people who've worked with us.
And you talk about listening skills as being so important. So it's not just what a person says, how they say it, how they stand, body language, but they're listening.
Most definitely. I know and you know what it looks like when somebody is not present when you're speaking with them. It's very transparent. You know, if you think about people that you talk to and you go, wow, that felt great. That person was right there with me. They were nodding, they were acknowledging what I was saying. The questions they were asking me as follow-up showed they were listening. Those are skills that need to be taught because they don't come naturally, particularly when people spend half their lives like this, right? We emphasize consistent eye contact. We emphasize listening and repeating back exactly what somebody says and then adding to it to help them develop the muscle of listening carefully. And we play games like telling stories one sentence at a time. If you're not listening, you're not ready for what's coming at you. And you can't anticipate what's coming because you don't know what the person in front of you is going to say, right? So it really helps them to get out of their heads and into the moment, which is really where we need to be, ideally, in any networking or business situation, is right there and listening to the person in front of us.
Do you think often people are anticipating what they're going to say next, and so they're not really hearing fully what's being said? I mean, is that part of the dynamic of wanting to really say something constructive and kind of constructing that as...
Most definitely. I found myself doing that at a meeting yesterday. The conversation was really just going back and forth and back and forth. Somebody said something and then somebody else was talking, and I was so in my head thinking about what I wanted to interject that I wound up cutting off somebody else. I was like, wow, I need to go back to my own class. Because it's our nature. It's what we do. We go into our heads, we start listening, we're processing machines. The challenge is that when we get stuck in there, we stop listening. And we very frequently say, if I'm talking to you and you start thinking about what you're going to say next, you stop listening to me and you're listening to you. It's less about like just stop doing that and more about let's just notice when we take ourselves out of the present and put ourselves back, and the discipline of doing that. All done through play and fun.
Nice.
Yeah.
And you mentioned you've worked with personality types. Do you find that there's some kind of almost typical issues people have based on their orientation to the world, like whether they're more introverted or extroverted, or how comfortable they are in social situations?
That's an interesting question. There's definitely an intersectionality between those two. If you think of the DISC model with the more outgoing people, they tend to talk more than they listen. The more introspective people, the C's and S's in the DISC model, tend to listen more than they talk. And so for team building, what we're always focusing on is let's make sure we get a balance of voices here. Let's make sure if you're one of the talking people that you notice who's not speaking. Because if there are 10 people in the room and only 2 people are talking for the whole meeting, first of all, why are the other 8 people there?
Right.
And I think you need to notice. And one of the agreements that we have is an acronym. It's WAIT, and it stands for Why Am I Talking? It's one of our agreements. We have people, it's like a reminder to them to notice the amount of space that they're taking up in a conversation or the amount of space that they're taking up in a meeting. And if they're dominating, they need to learn how to self-regulate and start asking more questions of the other people in the room. Otherwise, you're wasting that resource.
Absolutely. I know I've had experience with groups where we actually carved out time at the end to make sure that the people who were baking up all this great stuff inside had a chance to contribute it.
Yes.
So often we're on to the next topic, and someone is really thinking more deeply about something. And where does that come out?
Yeah.
And so that was a very effective meeting technique that I learned to help make sure, again, as a discipline, that all ideas get to the table.
Right.
And people are able to contribute.
Yes, and one of the things that I've noticed also with team dynamics is if you leave that person who had something to say and don't ask, by the second or third meeting where you don't ask, they just take their toys and go home. They'll sit there and they'll be present, and they're not going to volunteer after a while because they feel like they're not valued.
Right.
Now, granted, they could be more assertive. That's not necessarily their nature, and it's up to the person leading the meeting to notice, once again, the dynamics of who's speaking and who's not speaking.
There's a conventional wisdom that says don't form partnerships, especially don't form partnership with friends. And it sounds like your joint venture is very successful.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Do you think being a woman is a factor, or how does that influence? The both of you are women.
We're both women. We're very, very different in many ways and very, very similar in many ways. I tend to come much more from emotions and feeling. Jenny tends to be much more pragmatic. She's highly empathetic. I tend to be more nurturing. So that works well when we get in front of groups. Before we started our venture, we went away and did a long weekend. And, we talked about the dynamics of the business and what we wanted the brand to look like and what we wanted to stand for, blah, 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 blah. Then it got to happy hour. And we had a martini, and then we said, okay, so let's get real. What are our biggest fears? Mm-hmm. And our number one fear, both of us, was that something would happen that would implode our friendship. Because we both cried and said, that can't happen. What are we going to do to prevent the disintegration of our relationship with each other? How do we make that stronger? And so we have a really strong mandate between us to call it. If something doesn't feel right, if one of us is in a nasty mood, if somebody's using a tone of voice that doesn't work for either one of us, we just say, do you have a problem? Mm-hmm. In a non-accusatory, we use our improv skills, which are, how do I make my partner look good? I just assume good intent and just ask what's up, right? And if there is a problem, well, let's just stay in it and be uncomfortable until we work through it.
Okay.
And most of the time it's great. And when it's not, we work it through.
Do you have any working theories about women in business in general that you've learned from the work you've done?
Well, I have a decisive preference for working with women in business. I think they just tend to come from at things more intuitively and less structurally. And yet, when I seek out coaching, it's generally for structure. Mm-hmm. And I found that with women coaches and men coaches. Right? I prefer working with women in business. I think women have, especially around our age, the cumulative wisdom that we've aggregated here, it's worth sharing with each other and worth using to build each other up.
Let's talk a little bit about how you got to this point. So you have a master's in urban planning.
I do.
And you worked on a number of different projects before moving into the retail industry.
Yeah.
So take us through that path a little bit.
Okay, I'll do it quickly. I have an undergraduate degree in sociology and Spanish, and so my junior year in college, I went to Valencia, Spain. And while I was there, I learned to speak Spanish fluently, and I also was struck by the level of homelessness while I was there. And I came back as an undergraduate in sociology, not knowing what I was going to do, but knowing I probably needed a master's degree, wanting to build housing for people who didn't have housing. And so I was like, what do I pursue to do that? And somebody said, well, why don't you look at city planning? So I applied and was accepted at the University of Rhode Island. And I went there because they had a regional tuition rate. We didn't offer a master's in city planning here in Connecticut, which is where I was from. And it was what I could afford. And when I got there, I realized it was a land use planning school. So the subdivisions and shopping centers and regulating land use and development, with a very small piece of it being the urban planning piece. But I still persevered and wound up doing an urban internship in Providence, researching, places where they could put small zero lot line developments to build affordable housing. And I graduated wanting to do that and wound up anyway regulating subdivisions and shopping centers. Okay. It was a unique thing too to be, a 24-year-old woman in a pretty much all male environment. When I worked in Westfield, Massachusetts, I was the only woman in the building who was not part of the clerical staff. It was
pioneer.
I was a pioneer I guess I didn't see myself as a pioneer, but it was hard to develop a peer group. Right? Because there was this dis-ease that I had about spending too much time with the other women in the building because I was having a hard time putting the stake in the ground as one of the professional staff.
Right.
So it was kind of lonely until I met a couple people who didn't work in City Hall and were sort of out of that whole thing, and then that worked. Okay. Then I transferred to Meriden and got a job as the assistant planning director in Meriden. And then I worked from planning to economic development. So I worked for Meriden Economic Development Corporation for almost 3 years. And while I was there, and I loved that, I loved going from being a regulator to being an enabler. helping people find financing, find sites, figure out how to get what they wanted using the zoning regulations instead of being the one in the office saying, well, I don't think we can do this, and let's check the radius on that curb. That really wasn't my thing. But economic development was much more in my wheelhouse because it allowed me to do a lot of networking and really find ways. It's where I really honed my connector skills, which are one of my sharpest offerings these days. You know, just having lived so many different lives professionally, I really know how to put people together, and that helped a lot in economic development to help people find a place to be and financing and to network among, you know, Small Business Development Center and all the other resources. And it was while I was working in economic development that I met the principals from Bob's Stores because they moved their corporate headquarters to Meriden. And after the grand opening and the ribbon cutting and all that, I was having lunch with the CFO and said, you know, if you guys are ever looking for somebody to help you with your real estate expansion, pick me, because I would be an awesome liaison between the corporation and the local zoning officials. And they called me 2 days later and they said, we'd like you to come in and interview for a job as our community relations director. And I said,
Hello.
okay, but why? And they said, well, we like you. You're smart. You can figure this out.
Nice.
Okay, right? And just like that, I just sort of went, okay, I'm done with that. I'm doing this. And really that has been my whole career path. It's not really a path. It's my path, but it's
Your
definitely.
journey.
Yeah, journey, thank you.
Yeah.
My nonlinear path.
Yeah.
It's always been like, yeah, why not? Let's try that. And it was a blast. I worked with a man who was the CFO, and they made him the Chief Community Relations Officer. And we started a professional development grant program for teachers, and we were giving away money and planning golf tournaments, and they made me the company spokesperson, and I got to go and do things, and it was very, very cool job, and I loved it because I had my hands in every part of the organization. My favorite thing that we did while I was there is we started a program called Santa's Samples. All of the buyers would have just piles and piles of clothing in their offices that was sent to them by different vendors. And they always had, like, the tag was cut or there was a small rip in it. And I would say, well, what do you do with that? I was like, well, nothing. We recycle them. So I got in touch with the YWCA in Meriden and said, do you have any families that need stuff at Christmas? And they gave us a list. And then we were able to fill, like, most of the requests of the families, either with the samples that were in the offices or, you know, out in the warehouse. We had the whole return to vendor, which is like somebody would bring it back because it had a slight snag in it. Perfectly good winter coat with a slight snag. So we were able, I think we did 28 families the first year. And we did that for the whole time I was there. And people loved it. You know, we would get everybody down in the cafeteria and we'd wrap the presents and made them feel good and made me feel good for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then in 1997, I was sitting at home with my infant and got a call from Bob's, and they said, we're closing 7 stores and we have to make some cuts in the home office. And
Bye-bye.
we're eliminating your job.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's when I started my own business as an entrepreneur.
And you had support, right?
Yeah.
Family. You
Very
have
much.
a history of endeavors in the people in your immediate circle. It sounds
Most
like your
definitely.
husband was supportive.
Very much so.
Because
Yeah.
that's a big leap.
It was a big leap, except that I grew up, my father owned a retail store. My older sister founded a company called Eco Bags, which has been in business since 1989, cleaning up the planet one bag at a time.
Okay.
I'm not trying to give her a commercial, but she was
Yeah.
one of the pioneers in this whole concept of reusable bags. And she was doing it before it was cool. And then my younger sister founded a sea salt company on Martha's Vineyard. So the three of us are we're always looking for the next opportunity and a way to make a difference. So I had the support of everyone around me to go dog go.
So that was almost 20 years ago?
Yeah.
And you did facilitation and training and...
Yep. It was while I was at Bob's and we were giving out grants for diversity training that I went to my first ever diversity training session. I had no idea really what we were paying for, so I decided I should go see it. Came out of those 12 hours and went, this is what I'm supposed to be doing.
Nice.
And I had never had that kind of immediate connection to a body of work. So I went back to the Anti-Defamation League and said, what do people do when they go to one of your sessions and come out saying, I want to do this? And Margie Shapiro at that time said, we have openings for facilitators. Would you like to try that? And I said, I have no experience doing that. She said, you'll be fine. So, I shadowed and co-facilitated with someone for a while, and then I became one of their frequent flyers and training. And then when I was set free from Bob's, I raised my hand and said, Margie, I'm here and I'm available much more often.
Okay.
So I started doing more work for the ADL, and then within a short amount of time found other clients where I could do similar work. Then I got my Myers-Briggs certification, and I got my, DISC certification, and just started expanding the body of work that I could do. So I was doing the training, and I also owned a marketing and PR company called Solutions PR and Event Marketing. And I did event marketing and public relations and sponsorship sales, because at Bob's I had been the one reviewing the request for sponsorships. That was under my umbrella was the sports sponsorship, special events, charitable giving, and all of the customer relations stuff. That was what I was managing at Bob's. So when I pulled out the Rolodex, I know that's an old term, but when I pulled out the Rolodex, I was looking at who can I help to raise money for their nonprofit, because I had been sitting there receiving 30 requests a month. I knew what the good ones looked like, right? So I knew how to create that on behalf of organizations and say, if you really want to compel a sponsor to give you money for an event, you need to change your orientation. Not this is how much money we need to raise, but this is the amount of value we can deliver to you. And I did that with a lot of success and did big events like First Night Hartford for 8 years, the Taste of Hartford while it was on Constitution Plaza, Advo Summerwind, which was a huge concert series.
One term you shared when we discussed before you came on the show, crossover skills, right? I mean, you really took things from your experiences and looked at them more discreetly and said, where could I apply this in another setting?
Yeah.
And it sounds like your time at Bob's, where you started doing the facilitation, kind of unknowingly you
Yes.
were building another branch of things you could offer that you then were able to kind of jump onto when you needed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, 2012 was when I officially took off the PR event marketing hat and put the trainer facilitator hat on full time.
Okay.
And said, okay, this is what I'm doing. And I created a subset of my company and gave it a different name and started going out and marketing and saying, this is what I do. And I started developing a pretty decent customer list. And so I was doing that for like a year and a half, maybe close to 2 years. And that's when Jenny and I started saying, let's do this together. So,
Fun.
So that's what I've been doing ever since. In fact, tonight is the 2-year anniversary of when we had our first public workshop.
Well, this is a celebration
It
of
is.
that.
Yeah.
That is wonderful.
Yep.
As we move into our 50s, women can develop a sense of what I call Zenith Years, where you already talked about it. We pull together our experiences and we hone our instincts, and we know when to zig and we know when to zag. What types of things might you look forward to doing? I know it's hard to predict because you seize the moment, going forward.
Well, health is really important to me. So being able to hike and bike and ski, hopefully into my late 70s and early 80s. I have the great fortune of belonging to a ski club here in Connecticut. And last night we had our award ceremony for our racing season. And there were 2 women in their 80s who got awards, who showed up and skied a race course. And I'm like, I want to be them.
Okay.
So from a fitness standpoint, it's definitely that. From a work standpoint, I can't imagine retiring yet. We are having so much fun. I'm only 56. I figure, I've got another 10, 15 years anyway.
Yeah.
As long as I continue to be relevant for the people in the room and have something to share and say that they want to hear, I think I'll be out there and actively pursuing the teaching and facilitation piece. And hopefully I'll have some grandkids to play with.
Okay. And it sounds like, for example, last night there were some women that were like role models for you. I mean, you were able to look at someone and say, I want to be somewhat like that person in this way.
Yes.
What part do you think role models play in helping women assume their professional selves?
I think it's critically important. I think there are a lot of really bad role models out there right now, particularly for young women. And I think it's super important for me as a mom to stay connected to my daughters, for them to understand what it is I do and the impact that I make in the world, so that they understand that someone who's almost 60 has a lot to offer the world. So sort of building the belief in younger women that the women who are a couple generations ahead of them have a lot to offer to them, and then also continuing to support and seek knowledge from the women who are now, like one of my coaches is 70 plus, I think. I never asked, right?
Yes.
I think that we really owe it to each other to continue to listen to each other.
Beautiful. Absolutely. One of my guests came on, and I thought, again, I didn't ask her how old she was, and 88, working full time.
Wow.
Yes. Amazing lady. And
Awesome.
she said, I never let age be a factor. If I can do it and modify what I'm doing and whatever, that's where I'm at. And
Yeah.
yeah.
It's mostly a matter of mind. Isn't
Yeah.
that the saying?
Well,
If you don't
and
mind,
she's-
it don't
yeah,
matter.
It don't matter. And if you could write a letter to your 25-year-old self, maybe 40, can you think of some things you might tell yourself?
Yeah.
Dear Ellen.
Dear Ellen, choose yourself more often. Listen to your mother. Take care of your back. Make sure your core stays strong. Eat your vegetables.
Okay.
You know, just the whole eat well. Eat well, be well, take time for yourself, do yoga. I think there's so many women, particularly because I remember this. My kids were born when I was 34 and 36. So I was an older mom, and I remember being completely wrung out and having nothing left. Like no vibrancy, no energy. And I did that to myself. Granted, it's exhausting to have young children when you're an older mom like that. But I was the one that was just giving it away, giving away, giving away, giving away. And the people around me weren't saying you need to stop and take care of yourself. Right? Because they were on the receiving end. My kids weren't going to say it naturally.
Right.
My husband was working as hard as he could so that I could work from home and do the other stuff with the kids. And I had a full-time business. It's not like I had a little side thing going on. I had a full-time business plus the kids plus the housekeeping. And I didn't ask for help. So I guess that would be my one thing that's most important, is take care of yourself and ask for help when you need it.
Thank you. And we always close with a quote. And would you like to share your quote from Eleanor Roosevelt?
Nobody can make you feel inferior without your permission.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Ellen. This has been terrific.
Yes,
and
it
I'm
has.
sure
Thank
everyone
you.
has gotten enlightened through hearing your very sincere stories and very
Thank you.
interesting journey.
Thank you.
And please tune in to hear other fascinating women on future segments of Midlife Matters. Georgian Lussier, your host. Thanks for joining us.